My hands, they say, tell the story of my life. The skin is a roadmap of wrinkles, the knuckles a little swollen from 60 years of work, and the pads of my fingers are permanently calloused. My late husband, Robert, used to hold them in his own rough hands and say they were the hands of a queen who built her own castle. We never had a castle, of course. Just a small, sturdy brick house that we paid off one overtime shift at a time. He worked the steel mill, and I was a seamstress. Not the fancy kind who makes ball gowns, but the kind who could take a worn-out coat and make it last another winter, who could turn scraps of fabric into a quilt that would keep a child warm. There was a dignity in it. Making something useful, something that lasted. That was our gospel. Hard work, honesty, and looking after your own. I had 2 children, Sarah and David. Sarah was like her father, steady and kind, with a quiet strength that you could always count on. David was my shooting star. He was bright and ambitious, and from the time he was a little boy, he wanted more than our small world could offer. I didn't see it as a flaw then. I saw it as a fire that I had to feed. I worked extra hours, took on any mending job I could find, just to make sure he had the best books, the nicest clothes for school, the chance to go to a state university. Robert and we poured ourselves into him, believing he would carry our family name to places we could only dream of. And he did. He graduated with honors, got a good job in the city, and then he met Clarissa. She came from a different world entirely. Her parents, the Montgomerys, lived in a sprawling house in a neighborhood where the silence was only broken by the sound of sprinkler systems. They were old money, a term I only understood from television. They were polite enough to me, in a distant, careful way, like they were handling a piece of antique porcelain they weren't sure was valuable. David changed after he met them. He started to talk differently, dress differently. He'd call me less, and when he did, he'd gently correct my grammar or tell me a story I told was a bit too provincial. Mom, it stung, but I told myself this was the price of his happiness. He was building a new life, and I was just the foundation, meant to be unseen. Then came the wedding. It was all Clarissa and her mother talked about. A grand affair at a country club, with a string quartet and flowers flown in from someplace I'd never heard of. David and Clarissa sat at my small kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, looking uncomfortable. They laid out the plans, the costs. The numbers made my breath catch in my throat. It was more than Robert and I had earned in 5 years combined. David wouldn't look at me. He just stared at a crack in my linoleum floor. We can't afford this, he mumbled, finally. The Montgomerys, they expect a certain standard. And we just can't ask them for more. Clarissa patted his hand. It's fine, darling. We'll just have something small. It's not about the party, but her eyes told a different story. A volcano of love and fear erupted inside me. The fear that he would be seen as less than his new family. The fear that he would lose this woman he seemed to worship. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the house silent around me, and I thought of the nest egg Robert and I had built. It was for emergencies. For a new roof, for medical bills, for a comfortable old age. I thought of Robert's face, covered in soot after a 12-hour shift, smiling as he handed me his paycheck. For our future, Ellie, he'd say. The next morning, I went to the bank. I closed the account. The money, a lifetime of savings, felt both heavy and light in my hands. I called David. I'll pay for it, I said, my voice steady. I'll pay for the wedding. All of it. Just be happy, son. He was silent for a moment. Then he burst out with gratitude, telling me I was a lifesaver, the best mother in the world. He promised to pay me back, a promise I knew he couldn't keep and I never intended to collect on. For 2 months, my life was a flurry of invoices. The caterer, the venue, the florist, the band. I paid each one directly from my cashier's check, keeping a meticulous file of the receipts, not out of suspicion, but because that's how I was raised. You keep track of things. You are responsible. The wedding day arrived. I had made my own dress, a simple navy blue silk that I thought was elegant and understated. But standing in that grand ballroom, surrounded by women in designer gowns and glittering jewels, I felt like a sparrow that had wandered into a flock of peacocks. People were polite, but their eyes slid past me. I was David's mother, a relic from a past he was working so hard to transcend. During the speeches, Mr. Montgomery stood up, his voice booming with practiced confidence. He talked about his beautiful daughter and how proud he was to welcome David into their family. And then he said it. And we are just so thrilled to be able to give these two kids the wedding of their dreams, to start them off on the right foot. He smiled, raising his glass. The room erupted in applause. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, my heart pounding against my ribs. I looked at David, expecting him to correct his father-in-law, to at least give me a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. He just smiled, a wide, bright, false smile. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and in that glance I saw not gratitude, but panic. And shame. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a public erasure. My sacrifice, my life savings, Robert's sweat and toil, all of it wiped away in a single, benevolent lie. I thought, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he would thank me privately. Later, as the band played, I found him standing with the Montgomerys near the towering wedding cake. I approached them, holding a small wrapped gift. It was a pair of antique silver cufflinks I had found, engraved with a D. They had belonged to my own father. A piece of our history. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I wanted to give you this. He didn't take the box. He looked at Clarissa, at her father, and a mask of cold annoyance settled over his features. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous hiss meant only for me, but I saw Mr. Montgomery's eyebrow raise in curiosity. Not now, Mom, he whispered harshly. Just go and enjoy the party. You don't have to do this. He turned his back to me slightly and said to his father-in-law, a little too loudly, a dismissive chuckle in his voice, she gets a bit emotional. She's not really used to things like this. He didn't know I heard his next words, spoken to his new wife as they turned away. God, I wish you would just understand. She's not really part of this family anymore. This is our family now. The words didn't just hurt. They were like a shard of glass that slid right between my ribs and pierced my heart. It wasn't just the lie about the money. It was the complete and total severance. I was no longer his mother. I was a liability. An embarrassing old woman from his past. I was invisible. I was nothing. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The music from the string quartet faded into a dull roar in my ears. The laughter of the guests felt like mockery. I stood there for a moment, the small gift still in my hand, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, even if they weren't really looking. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until I was nothing but a shadow in a navy blue dress. I didn't cause a scene. My dignity, the one thing I had left, was a shield. I walked back to my small, empty table in the corner. I placed the unopened gift on the white linen tablecloth. I picked up my fork and took a single, deliberate bite of the wedding cake I had paid for. It tasted like ashes. Then I stood up, retrieved my coat, and walked out of the ballroom, my back straight, my head held high. I didn't look back. My daughter, Sarah, caught up with me in the parking lot. The cool night air was a relief on my burning face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Mom, I saw what he did. I heard what he said. He had no right. He had no right. She hugged me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to lean on her. Her validation was a small, warm candle in the cavernous darkness that had opened up inside me. She was Robert's daughter, through and through. She saw the truth. It's all right, sweetheart, I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant. Let's just go home. The drive home was silent. Sarah held my hand, her grip tight and protective. But back in my house, the house that Robert and I had filled with love and laughter, the silence was different. It was deafening. Every object seemed to mock me. The photo of a smiling David on the mantelpiece, the chair he always sat in, the faint smell of the pipe tobacco Robert used to smoke. This was the castle I had built, and its prince had just banished me from the kingdom. I sat in Robert's old armchair for hours, not moving, not crying. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was like a winter morning after a blizzard, the world frozen and still, but you could see every detail for miles. David hadn't just insulted me. He had tried to erase my existence, my history, my husband's legacy. He had taken our sacrifice and thrown it away like trash, all to buy his way into a family that valued appearances over truth. And in that profound silence, a decision formed within me. It wasn't born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was simpler and more powerful than that. It was a resolve to reclaim the truth. I would not be a footnote in my own life story. I would not be erased. He thought I was powerless, a relic to be stored in an attic. He was about to learn that foundations are the strongest part of any building. The next day, I didn't weep. I got to work. I went to the old wooden desk where I kept our important papers. I pulled out the accordion file labeled "Wedding" inside, nestled neatly, was every single invoice, every canceled check, every credit card slip. The venue deposit. The caterer's fee. The $5,000 bill for the flowers. The receipt for Clarissa's designer dress, which David had sheepishly asked me to cover at the last minute. The paper trail of my love and his deception. I spent the morning at the public library, making 3 pristine copies of everything. A week later, I received a stiff, formal invitation in the mail. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery request the pleasure of your company at a celebratory brunch in honor of the new couple, David and Clarissa. It was clear I was an afterthought, an obligation. My name wasn't even spelled correctly. They had called me Eleanor Rigby, as if I were a character in a song and not a real person. Sarah was furious, telling me to throw it in the trash. But I folded it carefully and placed it in my purse. That Sunday, I put on the same navy blue dress. It was my armor now. I drove to the Montgomery's Country Club, a place I never thought I'd see again. I walked into the sun-drenched private dining room, and the chatter dimmed for a moment. I saw David's face, a flash of horror, then annoyance. Clarissa gave me a tight, brittle smile. I ignored them both and found a seat at a table with some of Clarissa's elderly aunts, who chattered about their gardens and ignored me completely. After the mimosas were poured, Mr. Montgomery stood up, tapping a glass with a spoon. He beamed at the small, exclusive crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As I said at the wedding, we are just so overjoyed to welcome David into our family. He's a fine young man, and Clarissa is a lucky girl. We're so happy we could provide them with a beautiful start, a wedding they'll remember forever." He was about to sit down when I stood up. My heart was a quiet, steady drum. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "That's a very generous sentiment, Mr. Montgomery," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "And I'm sure you mean it. But it's not the truth." A collective gasp went through the room. David went pale. Clarissa looked like she might faint. I walked to the head table and placed one of the copied files in front of Mr. Montgomery. I placed another in front of David. "My name is Eleanor Miller," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I was a seamstress. My late husband, Robert, worked at the steel mill for 42 years. We were not wealthy people, but we were honest. And we loved our son." I tapped the file in front of David. "I paid for this wedding. I paid for the venue you are standing in. I paid for the food you are eating, the flowers on this table, and the dress on your beautiful bride. I did it with the entire life savings my husband and I scraped together over a lifetime of hard work. I did it because I wanted my son to be happy." I looked directly at David, my son, who now looked like a stranger. "I didn't ask for a public thank you. I didn't ask for anything. But I will not stand by silently while my existence, my husband's legacy, and the single greatest gift I could ever give you are erased with a convenient lie." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Mr. Montgomery was staring at the receipts, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning fury. Clarissa was weeping silently. David just stared at me, his mouth open, his face a wreck of shame and rage. "Enjoy your brunch," I said softly to the room. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the truth, in black and white, sitting on the table behind me. The power hadn't just shifted. It had returned to its rightful owner. The phone call came 2 hours later. It was David. He wasn't crying. He was screaming. The sound was so full of rage it was almost inhuman. "How could you?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. How could you do that to me? To us? You ruined everything. Everything. The Montgomerys are furious. Clarissa won't even look at me. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. The accusations washed over me, but they couldn't touch me. The glass shard in my heart had been removed, and the wound, while still there, was finally able to begin healing. I listened patiently until he ran out of breath, his rage collapsing into ragged, self-pitying sobs. David, I said, my voice as calm as a still lake. I didn't humiliate you. Your choices did that. I didn't tell a lie, you did. I just told the truth. You wanted me to be invisible, to not be part of your family. You can't erase the root of the tree and expect it to bear fruit, son. It doesn't work that way. But why? He choked out. Why did you have to do it like that? You did it to hurt me. No, I said, and this was the most important part. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it to honor me. And to honor your father. There is a difference, I paused, then said the words that would draw the new, permanent line in the sand. I have to go now, David, and I gently hung up the phone. In the weeks that followed, a quiet strength settled in me. Sarah was my constant companion, her support a balm on my soul. News travels fast in a small town, and the story, in its own way, got out. Old friends from the mill, neighbors I'd known for decades, they didn't treat me with pity. They treated me with a new kind of respect. One afternoon, my old neighbor, Maria, brought over a lasagna and said, "Good for you, Ellie." Some people need to be reminded where they come from. Their validation was a quiet comfort, reinforcing that I had done the right thing not for revenge, but for my own dignity. The pain of David's betrayal began to transform into something else. It became a purpose. I looked at my old sewing machine, the singer that had helped pay for his education. I looked at my hands, the hands that could mend and create. I decided I wasn't done building things. I sold the big house, the one filled with too many ghosts and a silence that was too loud. I used some of the money to buy a small, bright apartment and the rest to rent a little storefront downtown. I opened a small community workshop. I called it the Mending Room. I started teaching young people how to sew, how to patch jeans, hem a dress, make a quilt from scraps. It wasn't just about the skill. It was about the philosophy. It was about taking what is broken and making it whole again. It was about the value of your own two hands, about creating something real and lasting in a world that seemed increasingly fake. The workshop became my sanctuary, filled with the chatter of young voices and the hum of sewing machines. In my small workspace at the back of the shop, I framed a single piece of paper. It was the final, paid-in-full receipt from the country club. I didn't hang it for anyone else to see. It was for me. A private monument to the day I refused to be invisible. It was a reminder of the price of truth, and that my own self-worth was something I had earned, not something anyone could give or take away. News of David trickled in through Sarah, who heard it from a cousin of Clarissa's who felt sorry for me. The marriage, built on a foundation of lies and social climbing, didn't last a year. The Montgomerys, deeply embarrassed and unforgiving, cut David off completely. The job he had, which had been secured through his father-in-law's influence, vanished. He was adrift, the life he had so desperately wanted dissolving like sugar in water. About a year after the brunch, he showed up at my workshop. He looked thin, tired. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by worn jeans and a faded jacket. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, watching the teenagers laugh as they worked on their projects. He wasn't there to yell. He was there because he had nowhere else to go. He mumbled an apology, something about not knowing what he was thinking. But then the real reason for his visit came out. He had debts. He needed a loan, just to get back on his feet. He was asking for money again. The cycle was starting all over. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and I felt not anger, but a deep, profound sadness. He still didn't get it. He still thought value was something you could count in a bank account. I shook my head slowly. "I don't have any money for you, David," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But this place, this is what I have. This is real. This is what your grandfather and I believed in." I offered him no money, only the truth of my new life. He left with his head hanging, the gulf between our worlds wider than ever. But something must have broken through. 6 months later, a letter arrived. A single sheet of paper in a plain envelope. The handwriting was his. It was short. Mom, it read. You were right. About everything. I wasn't ashamed of you, I was ashamed of myself. I am so sorry for the man I was. David, there were no excuses. No justifications. Just the simple, unvarnished truth. It was a beginning. Today, my life is quiet, but it is full. The workshop thrives. My apartment is filled with sunlight and the smell of fabric. I am no longer waiting for an apology or for my son to see my worth. My worth is in the hum of the sewing machines, in the proud smile of a young girl who has just sewn her first perfect seam. My peace is my own. Sarah and her husband gave me a granddaughter last year. They named her Lily. Sometimes, Sarah brings her to the workshop. Lily will sit on my lap, her tiny fingers tangling in my threads, her eyes wide as she watches me work. The other day, she watched me expertly fix a tear in her little teddy bear. She looked up at me with absolute awe and said, "Grandma, you can fix anything." In that moment, any lingering shadow of the past dissolved. That was my legacy. Not a son who married into wealth, but a granddaughter who understood the magic of mending what is broken. That was the purest validation, the purest love. I still have the letter from David. We speak sometimes, short, careful conversations. The relationship is not what it once was, and it never will be. Trust, like fine silk, is easily torn and nearly impossible to mend without the seam showing. But there is a path forward, one built on the hard ground of reality. His future is his own to build or to mend. My focus is here, in my mending room, with my community, with my granddaughter. I have learned that you cannot force someone to honor their roots. A tree that is ashamed of where it comes from will never stand tall enough to offer shade to anyone. I am a seamstress. I am a grandmother. I am Eleanor Miller. And my story is my own. I finally have my voice back, and I will not be silent again.